Today's focus is new rules for Tesla stock as we enter the split. We also take a look at Battery Day based on a large number of people actually mentioning it based on our last show. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Today's show topic, also wanted to thank our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the show, we have daily trade blasts and other information on our Patreon page that we do not offer in the regular show. So you're actually missing out on a lot of information that will help your trading and investing in Tesla. I also wanted to note that we got a comment regarding the mic setup and me wearing a jacket. And I will share that I've got shorts on and my Crocs, and the mic was actually donated by one of our viewers. So we appreciate all the support given by different folks to help the show be better. And constructive criticism is always appreciated. So the first thing I wanted to review today is new rules that are in place when it comes to Tesla and the stock split. The key rule change that's occurred is the fact that, number one, there will be no aftermarket trading on the 28th of August 2020. Number two, there will be no pre-market trading on the 31st of August 2020. And so those two rules will now be in place. Now, so that's the facts of what's been stated. So one of the things that I wanted to review here is just the fact that one of the things I have not liked about companies like Tesla and how the market handles them is there's a number of rules that are in place to give the market makers competitive advantage over regular consumers. Those rules include the fact that you have aftermarket and pre-market trading that goes on. And if you're a regular watcher of Tesla, what you'll notice is that there's this phenomenon where perhaps 50, if not 70% of the gain on Tesla's stock price tends to happen in the after hours or in the pre-market hours. So if you value making good money and making good money on Tesla, I highly recommend that you get permission to enter pre- and post-market trading. All you have to do is check in with your respective broker, and they'll explain to you the process of how you get to do that. And note, it can be risky because of a number of issues. For example, they have large spreads during those times, so you have to get comfortable with having to pick your price that you're buying or selling at, because you'll find that it's really not for novices. You can make really good money there because you get to trade before or after the market. But there are a number of things that you need to sort of get comfortable with, the biggest one being pick your price that you'd like to buy or sell at, and do not sit there and take the spreads or the stated prices that you're being given by the market makers at those times, because they tend to be not favorable to consumers. I've been watching one of our biggest traders as a regular after or before market trader, and I've been kind of watching him and seeing how that whole business works for the last 6 or 8 months, or 6 months. And I found it interesting that I guess the biggest thing I noticed is that as you develop a command of the rhythm of that space, be aware that being a little bit cheap on the price point you want to get at can cost you a lot of money on one hand, but on the other hand, picking your price and sticking to it can be a good thing. I feel like based on watching the numbers generated by him, it kind of felt like it's about a 60-40 split. 60% of the time, stocks started moving pre-market. You wanted to get into it, and you didn't because you didn't get the price you wanted on the bid-ask. But then, the stock started off with a 5 or 10 point move, and then it jumps 50 points. And so you're being stringent on your bid-ask price that you want to go at can be a pain. I'm not going to get more deeply into pre or post market in this fashion unless I get questions that are posed to me, which is one of the reasons why I chose to do this show as a follow-up to the last one we did. So the next thing this brings up is just an idea of supply and demand. So basically what's happening is there's trading that would happen at the end of the day on Friday and in the morning pre on Monday, which will not be occurring. So what this creates, I believe, is the potential for a rather large explosion in the stock price of Tesla at the open. So I would say do not be surprised at a 100-point, 150-point open in the first 3 to 5 minutes. Now, the question is, where does the stock go afterwards? You can't necessarily say that, but I do believe that we're going to see at least a 100-point up. And the reason is that there's a huge demand that will be pent up from Friday into Monday morning from large institutions that are usually able to trade pre and post market that won't be satiated until the market opens. And therefore, once it opens, I think you just see a burst of activity in terms of buying primarily. Theoretically, it could be from the selling side where people wanted to get out, but I think that the potential for the increase in value in the short term will result in sort of an explosive day. So what this means then, since there's no after or before market, you have to get in there on Friday. And I think this creates, more pressure on why Friday is going to be a very big day. It's going to be a high delta day, et cetera, or high implied volatility. I'm told that it's theta, but I'm referencing as a delta. The point is that there's something called change, and implied volatility will be the highest on Friday, but it'll be one of the highest that Tesla's ever seen. This actually brings up an interesting point that's happening that I've been watching carefully for Tesla in terms of implied volatility, and that is that there's this interesting thing going on. When Tesla announced their earnings, on the stock side, everything was moving along sort of as normal. Obviously, the stock price fell afterwards because S&P didn't immediately announce. But as we were going into earnings, usually for every stock, the highest implied volatility, I'm calling it delta, you can call it theta, is the day before earnings are announced. And then immediately the next day, if the implied volatility drops dramatically, it doesn't go to zero, but very, very low, like drops by an order of magnitude 10x. And so if you don't get that bump in stock price associated with news that should move the stock heavily, it's a disaster because the value of the option drops dramatically because implied volatility drops so much. And it was a huge, maybe half, if not 3/4 of the value of that option. And this explains one of the theories that we often talk about, hear about, which is buy on the news and sell on the rumor. On the stock, it may or may not be that a big deal, but on the options, it's absolutely huge. One of the suggestions I would make for the advanced traders and our viewers is take a look at how implied volatility increases over time. So if you're looking at options or buying them, in theory, if you're buying ahead of time, you could target, sort of two groups of options that you're buying. One group is designed to take advantage of the implied volatility, which means that you're buying with the goal of selling just before earnings. And then the other group could be maybe a longer term group where you have options that are going out weeks, months that are not exploiting that. But I think that the amount of money that's been rolling in terms of Tesla on implied volatility is amazing. Also brings up the point that for those of you who are knowledgeable enough to start selling puts and calls with implied volatility being enormous for Tesla and having a large amount of money out there, in theory, you could actually do very well selling puts and calls and bringing in cash from that instead of trying to buy them and enduring the risk associated. So we'll see what happens with this. But in general, new rule change is going to affect how the stock moves. it's actually, I think, going to create up a lot of pent-up demand that's going to push the stock heavily upon split. And I think that, we all know that Tesla is capable of a 100-point move in 3 or 5 minutes. I would not be stunned to see a 100 to 200-point move in the period from 9:30 on Monday morning until 9:10, 9:15, because of how explosive the split is, combined with the fact that you have pent-up demand associated with entities that couldn't get in pre or post-market. Look forward to your comments on this. It should be exciting. The second thing I wanted to review is what's going on with Battery Day. We did our show yesterday, and we had at least 15 people reference the fact that I didn't include Battery Day in the potentially explosive activities. Well, the thing about it is Battery Day has been moved to the same day as they're doing the earnings announcement, which is interesting, strange, because it doesn't allow Battery Day to ride on its own for how it might impact things, but it also sort of sneaks in on the territory and movement of the stock price that's usually reserved for what happens when earnings come out. I think that earnings are going to be good. I don't see any big problem. There's some discussion of slowdowns in China related to the flooding and how cars are getting out, but I think the numbers will come out fine. What I'm intrigued by, though, is that it just seems to me the SEP entry is a bigger deal than what the earnings might do. And so this brings me to my discussion of Battery Day. Now, we actually did a whole show on the fact that I think Battery Day is a complete waste of time and energy for a number of reasons. Number one, principal reason, is that Tesla has a thing going where you'll notice about every 90 to 120 days, Tesla announces an increase in range for the top-of-the-line vehicles. In this case, I think the Model S seems to be the car that he's focused on giving the most range to, and 400 miles plus is what's sort of being discussed, etc. So the number one reason why I think that Battery Day is a waste is just the fact, and I don't think it's a big deal, is that it's a lot better for Tesla to reveal breakthroughs in the form of adding them to the car and letting that go out there, so competitors have to buy that car, rip it apart, and figure out how they got the extra range, rather than making it a Battery Day where you're revealing all your secrets and therefore shortening the time to which potential competitors have to sort of replicate your technology and come after you for the innovation it represents. So I think that also item number 2 is what I call the battery smokescreen. So you'll recall that Bob Lutz made a comment a few months ago where he said, the way to deal with Tesla is just put a bigger battery in the car and you win. Very simple. Well, that's a really good idea. The problem, though, is that the battery pack portion costs about $40,000 for Tesla competitors. So if you put 2 of them in before you even build a car, that's 80 Gs. So now you have the problem of putting a decent, what would people want to spend, call it $130,000, $150,000 on, which is a very well-equipped vehicle. So you can't go cheap on features like they did with the Bolt. So now if you put $20,000, $30,000 into the body of the car and load it on top of an $80,000 battery and its electronics, there's no way that vehicle is below $120,000, more like $150,000 for buyers. And that puts you in a quadrant where there aren't that many people that can afford to spend that much on a truck or will spend that much on a truck or other vehicle. So it's a small market segment. So it was a great idea of Mr. Lutz to suggest just double the battery size, but it doesn't, it's not helpful in terms of winning by the entities that are doing this. The reason I brought up Mr. Lutz is just the fact that I think actually a more interesting day than Battery Day is a software day. And the reason is that the reason why Daimler/Tesla no longer became friends after Daimler helped them going with with business, help them going by buying a stake in the company, give them capital to operate, is because Daimler asked, are we going to get the battery and thermal management technology that Tesla uses for its own vehicles, for the vehicles being built for Daimler? And Elon Musk said no. And that was the end of the working relationship between the two, because it was clear to Daimler and then and now that the software technology that's driving everything related to the battery is the secret sauce that makes Tesla a great company. And it's an advantage that has not been replicated by competitors yet. So I kind of bring this up because I could be forced to eat my words if Elon/Tesla comes back and says we're moving to solid state and we've figured out how to make it work. Then I would have to eat my words, but I don't see that one happening at all. I see an incremental increase potentially in range or getting rid of cobalt or something of that nature, but I do not see them whipping out solid state successfully and then pretty much destroying the entire industry and doubling the stock price in 24 hours is what would happen if that occurred, but I don't see it happening. And so therefore, the thing has been delayed 3 times already. I also have to say that the whole battery thing is very zany to me. 3 data points. First, I had a friend of mine from Stanford who's a chemical engineer, and we did a show maybe a year ago where he actually described going to visit the factory in Reno. And what he said, he was like, Greg, I know chemicals, I sell chemicals, and I'm in the semiconductor industry. And I've seen everything that they've had sitting there and know those chemicals well. It's just no big deal. Absolutely no big deal what they've got there. And therefore, if they're relying upon that to protect them from competitors, there's no way that they stay alive. So that's item number 1. Number 2 is that there's a rule within. So if you visit the Reno factory, the building is actually split. Of the, let's call it 6,000 employees there, 60% of them work for Panasonic in a totally separate company. And the employees from Tesla don't go into the Panasonic area. There's actually a doorway through which they pass vehicles that have, or batteries completed into the Tesla side of the house so it can be blended in to create battery packs. And so I'm really fascinated to have Tesla with its own research facilities on batteries and not producing their own batteries, but relying on Panasonic to do so. And they actually don't reach into Panasonic's process. As you all know, the reason Tesla chose Panasonic was they tried to buy enough batteries to be able to do 1 million cars a year from one of the Korean manufacturers who said, no, if we did that, you'd wipe out all the battery supplies to all the laptops, et cetera, that we supply currently. So that's why they built the Gigafactory in Reno to produce batteries. The reason they chose Panasonic was as they studied each of the companies that they could choose from to be a battery partner, they found that Panasonic had the highest density in their batteries. So they had an incremental between 5, I think, and 10% at that time advantage over competitors in terms of their battery density, and therefore they were chosen as the partner. And the way in which they get that better battery density than others is a secret sauce for how they operate. So so I thought it was interesting that there's all this research going in from the Tesla side, but on the Panasonic side, there's a secrecy thing between the two entities, which I was like, wow, that's really interesting given sort of the partnership they're working on, et cetera. The third thing is you've seen the number of delays that have been occurring. I guess my biggest part of why I think that Battery Day is kind of a waste of energy and time is that, for those of you who don't know it, if you look in your car, regardless of which car it is, the vertical integration that Tesla maintains allows them to keep tweaking the vehicles they produce. So according to one of the executives at Tesla, every 90 to 100, definitely every 90 days, but at least for sure every 120 days, there's about a 30% change in the vehicles that are being put out because Tesla retains its R&D in-house and is parallel with the production lines, which is an advantage. I guess it's an advantage on one hand. It's a disadvantage because parts keep changing like that. But in general, what this means then is Tesla has the ability to keep rapid upgrades of their vehicles to address problems and add new features, which gives them an edge over other entities. I think it sucks from the people trying to get parts when those things have problems, which we've seen, but it is definitely, in one angle, a competitive advantage. So I therefore am skeptical of Battery Day, and I think that there's enough news between S&P earnings, et cetera, to make Battery Day somewhat irrelevant from that standpoint. But I seriously don't see them doing anything significant is my analysis of that situation. So I hope Battery Day does something. I'm not saying I'm against it. I mean, the big weight for everybody right now is a transition to solid state. And there's a whole host of benefits that come with that. Better operation at low temperatures, faster charging, all kinds of amazing features. The problem they've had is even in China, they're running solid state buses and stuff right now. It's just that, amount of storage that can be done in that space is low currently. And somebody will eventually figure it out. It's been about to get done in the last, every year for the last 3 to 5 years. And a number of people, including Fisker, have articulated that they've kind of figured it out and they'll have a solution on the streets within the next year. But everyone keeps extending when that next year will be. So I think it will be interesting. Well, I want to thank you again for taking time out to join us. I also wanted to review, I think Battery Day is good, but I don't see anything major happening there that makes it that big a deal. Earnings will be bigger, and S&P is going to be way bigger than that. Number one. Number two. Number three, I do think that trading this week introduces some new challenges of thinking that you have to do because you won't be able to do pre or post market on Friday or Monday. And that will cause, I think, a huge updraft in the stock price at the beginning of the day on Tuesday. Who knows if it's going to be sustained, or on Monday morning after the split, who knows if it's going to be sustained. So due caution is in order. But I think it could be actually very, very lucrative if you're, it'll be lucrative for the stockholders because you're making more as you split and more people buy in. But I think it's particularly hugely lucrative to options traders because of how this is going to work. You also do want to be prepared for the fact that market makers know what's going to happen. So there will be an attempt to try to fleece you by the market makers if you move too slowly or don't handle yourself well in that situation. We usually do our health tips, but there's a gentleman who works for the FBI who did a book called Catch Me If You Can. He pretended to be a number of different professionals successfully and wrote this book about it. And he gave a tip on his show, or 7 million viewer show that you might want to think about, which is he pointed out that you should never use a debit card attached to your bank account. You should always use a credit card that's not attached to your bank account and then what you do is you pay off the credit card with money from that bank account. And the reason for that is that you don't want to expose your credit card to networks out there. You do not want to expose your debit card that's attached to your bank account to hackers because a lot of the networks that are used to process credit cards at your grocery store, at your Target, they got attacked recently, at your gas stations, all of those networks may not be maintaining their cybersecurity protocols. And if they don't, they get hacked. And when they get hacked and use your credit card, it's not a big deal because the credit card companies will credit you back quickly. If you were using your debit card, big problema. The big problema is that you now have the problem of trying to figure out how to get your money back from the bank, which is a whole different party and can take a lot longer. So highly recommend you avoid using your debit card when you're in any place but your bank, and their security tends to be higher than everybody else, and only use credit cards that reference credit cards that are separate, and that way you just make payments from your bank account to that credit card as a cybersecurity measure that will save you a lot of time and headache because a number of the retailers are being hacked regularly despite their efforts to maintain. I also like to, one of the quick thoughts that comes to mind is that I'm getting a master's in cybersecurity, and there was a heavy discussion. Target got hacked, and millions of people lost their information. And I thought it was interesting because what happened is that there's a gentleman or there's a company that works for Target that does remodels. And so they had remote access to allow them to go into the Target system, figure out which store they're supposed to work at, and then they were to go ahead and do the work. And so it wasn't actually Target directly that was hacked that caused this. They're maintaining their protocols. They had a third-party vendor, and that vendor got hacked, and someone used their access method to get onto Target's system and then create the nightmares that emerged from that. So my point being there that, there are a lot of potential weak points in the operations of these networks that could cost you a huge amount of money and a lot of headaches if you're allowing your card that you're using to directly access your bank account. Much better deal to make it a sort of a glancing blow where if somebody is hacked, they have to pay back the credit card company, which reimburses you quickly, versus those hackers getting directly to your bank account, and the rules are completely different. Just a reminder, 25 leg lifts to make sure you don't have any knee or other issues. Wanted to also note that the 5-2 or some other diet in that fasting zone is a good idea. Also want to encourage you to consider, I'm going to go out and do a little exercise right now, a few times a week, power walking or running as a way to also help on the health front. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, lehitrot, Hebrew, hoda hafez, Farsi, hey do, Swedish, zdravstvuyte, hello in Russian, ni hao ma, hello in Chinese,